Chapter 10. Lessons Continued. 13th hour, 4th day, 2nd month, year 807, post-Heavenfall.
All right, warm-up is over. Cease fire, a dwarf man barked against the ambience of the downpour. The instructor, Sentinel Dane Ironwool, was a stout and muscular man of light lavender skin and sported a thick moustache, white in colour. He wore the grey fatigues of the Nixian Deep Ground Corps and a tricorn hat over his head of long, braided hair. The accent that pronounced W's as V's further highlighted his heritage. He and the candidates all stood under the roofed section of a marksmanship range.
Looks like you all have a decent grasp of handling shortbows by now. Well, except for a couple of you. Dane glanced towards the targets that were devoid of hits. As you can tell, these weapons are relatively simple in design, and ammunition can be found aplenty, or even crafted in the field. Yet, what if you run low on arrows and materials are scarce? Today, we're going to work on using arc to conjure your shots.
Dane retrieved his bow and stood at the ready, eyeing a dummy over 150 feet away. While he pulled the bowstring back and aimed, a ghostly arrow materialized into a solid glass and remained so as it was loose. It sailed across the range, leaving a long, wispy trail of charged arc in its flight path before penetrating the target and fading out of existence. Rather than reaching for a quiver to reload the shot, Dane repeated the same motion of conjuring a new arrow before and shot it. As you can see, there are significantly more advantages to creating your own projectiles rather than relying on physical ones. You don't have to worry about keeping track of how many you have left, and you can draw an attack at a faster rate. This concept might not be new to some of you in the class, but the rest will most certainly appreciate this knowledge. Now pay close attention and watch carefully. Dane lowered his bow and positioned his hand on the middle of the string. This is something almost anyone can do, since we all have arc coursing through us. You don't have to be a spellcaster, because the mass and energy you're channeling is relatively light. To begin the process, use a short phrase in either draconic or celestial that would help evoke the conjuration of your missile. If you're not versed in either, you can say Ovid sia kosin, which roughly translates from the dragon tongue to load my arrow. As soon as you say it, mentally push your arc from the back of your neck, down the spine, through the arm retracting the string, and then to the fingers. Once there, imagine the shape, mass, and feel of a real arrow. The sentinel looked at his target across the range and spoke the incantation. Oid sia kosin. Another ghostly arrow originating from his fingertips materialized again. You'll want to keep channeling your arc and imagining the arrow as you pull your weapon back. It should become solid by the time you fully retract. Once you're ready, let the bow do the rest. Dane fired his shot and struck the dummy once more. Go and give it a try yourselves. Ariya took deep breaths to alleviate some of the anxiety bubbling within. Her fingers rubbed the bowstring, and she closed her eyes to remember the weight and texture of the training arrow's shaft and feathers. With another deep breath, she spoke the incantation. Oid sia kosin. Like a pulse, the elf pushed the pressure of her own arc from her mind, down her back to her arm and fingers. She could feel the object of her mind begin to manifest, albeit in a more loose and spongy form rather than something solid. The alien sensation caused her to lose concentration, and the conjuration dematerialized as quickly as it formed. Ariya tried again, but the projectile broke apart into fragments as soon as her hand began to pull the bowstring. She sighed disappointedly and watched Oriana manifest a perfect arrow and deliver it precisely into her dummy's head. Despite her envy and frustration, Ariya managed to suppress them and congratulate her classmate on the hit. Oh, thank you. Bards have to push their arc into their instruments to cast spells, so this feels pretty natural. I wish I could say the same, Ariya grumbled as she began to make another attempt. This time, the arrow felt properly solid and continued to stay so as she pulled the string back. Unfortunately, it disintegrated as soon as the fletching passed the bow. "Having trouble?" Sentinel Dane asked as he approached. "Let me see your technique." She repeated the motions again, but was unable to form even the arrow's shape under his scrutiny. "Not every day you see an elf who struggles with conjuring arc. Then again, it's not often you have a Nixian trusting it as much as I," Dane muttered. "Here, let's go back to using a normal arrow for a bit. Pick one up from your quiver, but don't knock it. Hold it up from the balance point." Ariya did just that, and the Sentinel continued his instructions. Slowly wave the arrow around and commit its weight properties to memory. Remember the feeling of the wooden grains and the texture of the feather. Maybe even have a very similar object in your mind as a reference, or push the image of it in different parts. Afterward, take your arrow and knock. Pull the string back, but pay more attention to the arrow itself before releasing the shot. The elf noted the contrast in teaching styles when compared to what she was once subjected to in Edenvalia. Arcane instructors back home often had trouble distinguishing between common sense and what required more guidance. As she slowly moved the arrow in the air, Ariya mentally noted the physics of its weight and how it balanced as she tipped it side to side. She then pulled her fingers back to the textures of the feathered fetching before running her thumb over the indentation of the knock. Once committing its form to memory, Ariya positioned the arrow into the bowstring, pulled back, aimed, and released it downrange. The shot arced and hit a dummy in the chest. "Good hit," Dane praised with a nod. "Now let's see if you can conjure a shot. Don't worry so much about hitting the target as just getting it downrange. Focus on drawing from the memory of the arrow you were holding and push that image out from your mind to your fingers." "Yes, Sentinel." Ariya closed her eyes and retreated into the memory of the object she held. She mentally divided the arrow into different pieces, starting with the knock, and worked her way upwards to the fletching, shaft, and arrowhead. The elf repeated these pieces over and over like a mantra. Knock, fletching, shaft, arrowhead. Knock, fletching, shaft, arrowhead. At the 6th repetition, Ariya breathed in deeply and spoke the activation phrase, Oridsia Kosin. The arrow manifested in the order of her mental mantra and finally solidified. Not wanting to break concentration, Ariya quickly pulled the bow back, aimed at her target, and released the ghostly missile downrange to score another hit on the dummy's torso. She threw her arms up and made a gleeful cry of triumph. "I did it! Thank you so much!" "Way to go!" Oriana congratulated. Dane gave a satisfied smile. "See? You can do it. With more practice, you'll figure out how to also invoke your incantation mentally and silently. Now see if you can do it again." By the time lessons ended in the late afternoon, Ariya's mind and muscles were both exhausted with strain. The rain had lightened, yet was still pattering enough to be uncomfortable in the open. As a result, she was glad to have remembered an umbrella for the journey between buildings. As Ariya walked back, she saw Zarin with a small group of other candidates carrying long bags for firearms. "Going to the range?" she asked, after waving to Zarin. "That's the plan," he answered. "We also wanted to check out Kellen's new rifle, since she's been bragging about it all day." He nodded to a shade elf who grinned eagerly. Like Ariya, Kellen shared the same ancestry of physical features, but had dark grey skin, silver hair, and red-hued eyes that could see further in the dark. As she recalled, these physical differences were caused by migration to the cavern holds of modern-day Nixion and many millennia of genetic drift. Muzzle velocity of 850 meters per second versus your old model with only 600. "I keep telling you to upgrade," Kellen quipped, sharing a similar dialect to Sentinel Dane. Zarin shook his head. I'm too used to it at this point. But think about how much further you can shoot without having to compensate for gravity. I'd have to relearn a lot of techniques, and it's not in my budget right now. Also, I heard there are still some quality control issues with the bolt on yours. Those concerns are overblown from the first batch that came out. The failure rate for that issue should be fixed by now. If not, I know a local gunsmith who won't charge an arm and leg. The Shade Elf then turned to Ariya and greeted her. Oh, sorry for butting in. It's nice to meet you, by the way. I'm Kellen. Likewise, I'm Ariya. Are you two on the same professional track? Kellen shook her head. No, I'm on the path of an inventor, since I plan to work more behind the scenes rather than be a field agent. I'm taking some gunslinger courses, more for self-defense. How about you? Rogue. At least that's the plan. It's only my first year here, so I haven't decided on what vocation I'd like to follow as a Sentinel. Kellen gave a beaming look of admiration. I have a lot of respect for rogues, and they often have many intriguing stories. Many of them make great analysts, too. Her eyes wandered at another group of individuals heading toward the ranges. Anyways, we better set up before they close for the night. Zarin agreed. Hopefully it won't be packed like last week. Have a good evening. It was good to meet you, Kellen waved. You too. I hope your rifle works perfectly, Ariya replied amiably. I'll see you around, Zarin bade farewell as he began to follow the Shade Elf. Before he could walk further away, Ariya called for him. I just remembered. Do you get a chance to do any research on the extra credit project? Zarin paused for a moment to decipher what she was referring to. It quickly dawned on him that she was referring to the case. Not yet. I had some assignments to catch up on, and I was exhausted by the time they were finished. You? I haven't yet, but I was going to the library to start. I'll come by after practice if you're still there. Otherwise, we can share thoughts about it in the common room. Sounds good, she acknowledged, before waving goodbye and going separate ways. As Ariya continued on past the sparring grounds, she watched a couple of spellcasters duel with cries of incantations and blasts of arc. The battle appeared fierce between the two, as impacts and pops reverberated like lightning in the rain. Her heart rate elevated at the scene, causing the elf to remember Pen mindlessly falling out of the window and the black spikes impaling her not too long ago. When one of the duelists was abruptly hit by their opponent's attack, Ariya could not help but grimace and turn away. She retreated with hurried breaths and quickly found herself back in the dry comfort of being indoors. Like the water droplets sliding off her umbrella, the apprehension fell and evaporated away beneath the warm glow of spell gem lights. Ariya pressed a hand to her heart and shook her head in disapproval. She felt embarrassed over the discomfort of offensive spellcasting, yet had never been a victim of one with murderous intent until recently. Regardless, the duel had also given her thoughts on what powers the Night Mother was capable of, and how she could better protect herself. Upon entering the library and seeing the soothing sight of its many bookcases, Ariya approached the nearest librarian sitting at the service desk. "Excuse me?" she asked. "Yes," smiled a late middle-aged human woman with curly white hair and a white cardigan. "I'm looking for any material regarding the Night Mother. Was she ever featured in the weekly gazettes about a year ago?" The librarian's welcoming smile quickly faded in exchange for puzzlement. The Night Mother? Bit of a morbid topic, to say the least. I certainly remember her in the news. Was it truly a year ago? I would have thought it was only a few months ago. Goodness me. What is time? Was she that infamous? I'm not from here, so I wouldn't know. The librarian folded her arms. She certainly made people uncomfortable. The Night Mother was a serial killer with at least 20 to 30 victims, if I remember correctly. Many of them were infirmed at houses and temples of healing. Ariya raised her eyebrows. That's horrifying. I didn't know she was such a terror in Ovyliax. It was a time when many people would avoid healers, even if they were in serious conditions. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief when they learned she had finally been caught. I don't recall many details about it, but we certainly do have articles archived. I could retrieve them. Ariya nodded. That'd be helpful, thank you. Any particular Gazette sources you'd like? The Weekly Summary, Rikers, Serial Chronicles, Hegemony News? Whichever sources are graded with few biases and highly accurate, please. Understood. Although I will say the very slanted tabloids are often a fun tickle of nonsense. The librarian jotted notes down onto a piece of paper and fed them into a slot under the desk. Less than a minute later, a motor began to sound from under the table and then stopped with a soft chime. The librarian opened a cabinet and pulled a tome which opened to a collection of articles involving the Night Mother. That's impressive, Ariya complimented. How did you pass out these articles so fast? Do you have some sort of machine? It's a combination of machines, and we have an extremely talented archivist working downstairs. She leaned in and whispered, "It's a sphinx." A sphinx? Ariya exclaimed. How did the Sentinels hire a sphinx? The librarian shrugged. They were here long before me, but they've been on the payroll for at least a couple 100 years. Send them my thanks if you get the chance. Will do. Was there anything else you needed help with? Ariya flipped the tome to the end and skimmed the passage regarding the Night Mother's death and cremation. There was another thing. Could you provide some sort of bestiary on the undead? The librarian gave a smirk. Your Sentinel instructor must be giving you some macabre research. Let me pull up the card catalogue and I'll give you a list of books that might suit you. After perusing through the shelves for the librarian's recommendations, Ariya pulled 2 textbooks to begin with. One was a basic field manual on the types of undead one could encounter in Mistoria, called Navigating Death. The other was titled Accounts of Jack Shin, who was an exorcist travelling to different parts of Zhu. With her reading material gathered, she headed to her favourite spot by the windows and began poring over them. After nearly a couple of hours, the elf was interrupted by the scent of smoky gunpowder as she looked up and saw Zarin approach. How's the research coming along? He asked. I finished going over the articles and I learned a lot more details, Ariya replied. They say she was a human named Erin Shearer and that she worked in the lower tier as an apothecary. For over 2 years, she had been poisoning critically ill and elderly patients to make it look as if they passed away naturally. When investigators began noticing a rise in unusual deaths, the Night Mother taunted the investigators with notes and puzzles to plummet her workplace's reputation. She followed the exodus of workers who felt unsafe or feared for their reputation, and then worked for a different place of healing to repeat the same methods. Zarin shook his head in disbelief. That's sickeningly twisted. How many did she murder? 37 were confirmed in the city's investigations, but there may have been more unaccounted for. That's also not counting the additional 9 she caused during the raid on her house. They underestimated how much of a skilled sorceress the Night Mother was, and she chose to fight back when cornered. As we already heard, the city wardens say she was eventually killed, and her body was sanctified and burned to prevent curses or lingering spirits. But according to Coley, she's still alive. So either the watch might have missed something, she's turned into something unnatural, or we're dealing with a copycat. Ariya grabbed the 2 books she obtained thanks to the librarian's assistance. That's why I pulled these out to start. The students of the academy think something was haunting the house, so maybe it's one of the creatures in here. Zarin opened one of the books and briefly skimmed a page. There's hundreds of different kinds of undead in the world. Finding the right one would take a while, and there's no guarantee the Night Mother is actually one. It's something to lead with, and we can look elsewhere if this doesn't yield anything fruitful. I can work on one, and you can look into the other. Which one do you prefer? The half-elf pointed to the Jack Shin book. I'm curious about the urban legends of Shu. I heard there are some entities exclusive to the continent that are very different. Have you heard of the slit-mouthed woman? Ariya nodded. I have, actually. A lot of elves are familiar with the old myth, since many of them came from the East. Parents would use it as a story to scare the youth into coming home early. My mum would say the Kuchisake Onna would catch me and slice my face with scissors if I snuck out again. Did anyone you know ever see one? Never. Also, I still snuck out plenty of times, and I've yet to meet the woman. What if the Night Mother is actually her? Then I owe my mum an apology. Zaran let out a soft chuckle. Thankfully, we can cross her off the list, since there were no cases of people with cut faces. Anyways, I'm going to grab something to eat. Was there anything you wanted me to get for you? Ariya pondered the question for a moment before she decided to stand up and gather her things. I can come with you to the refectory. I could use a break, and I wanted some caffeine too. Caffeine past the 18th hour? Isn't that going to affect your sleep? Ariya shrugged. I've slept enough in my youth that I only need an average of 4 hours now. That's right. I forgot fully blooded elves can do that. I unfortunately didn't inherit that trait, which I'm often envious of. As they turned to the hall nearing the refectory, the aroma of freshly baked bread drifted heavily in the air. Accompanying it was the scent of frying oils, garlic and spices, which attracted many diners to tonight's special, pan-seared salmon. While standing in line to receive food, Ariya asked, "By the way, did you ever find out who our next mentor is?" "I did," Zaran answered. "Matter of fact, I actually see him right now." He nodded to a faculty member at the head of the line who had filled up his plate with a massive helping. Ariya rapidly blinked and almost hoped the Sentinel would miraculously change with each shut of the eyes. "This will certainly be a different experience," she muttered. A bright flash of lightning illuminated the cityscape and shone through the window of Yeely Elston's home. Madame Elston mentally braced for the inevitable thunder that followed and winced when it boomed. The half-elf woman was dismayed over the onset of more rain, despite praying to Lutia for the evening respite to endure until it was time to go. Unfortunately, her wishes were answered by an intense storm. Luckily, she wouldn't have to walk far in the elements, since she had requested a stagecoach to pick her up tonight. Yeely walked into the living room, where an elderly human man laid on the couch and whispered in his ear, "I left food for you on the table." The man grunted, eyes remaining shut. "I'll see you in the morning." The half-elf woman leaned over and kissed him on the forehead. Appearing middle-aged herself, many would have assumed Yeely to be the daughter and the man to be her father. However, the opposite was true, and that it was she who was the parent and he the son. Yeely knew her mixed genetics had a high chance of bearing a human child she would outlive. Yet she still raised and cared for him as best she could, and continued to do so into his final days. With her belongings gathered, Yeely left home and ventured out into the torrent. The immediate sight of the stagecoach already parked in front was a very welcome sight as she battled to walk straight against the squall. Upon approaching the carriage, she shouted to the driver, "I don't envy you for having to drive me tonight, but I much appreciate it." "No worries, ma'am. I'm fairly well covered for the elements," a female voice replied. "Still heading to the Sentinel Academy?" "Yes, I have a late shift there tonight." "Let's be on our way then. I wouldn't want you to be more drenched." Yeely quickly scrambled inside and breathed a happy sigh of relief when she closed the door. As the stagecoach began to roll forward, the driver grinned a wide smile of razor-sharp teeth, knowing her prey had been caged.
"I'll be needing your face,"
she whispered malevolently.